Once upon a time, in a bustling city, there lived a wealthy woman named Madam Clara, known for her exquisite taste, lavish lifestyle, and her ruthless attitude towards anyone she deemed beneath her. The townspeople whispered about her cruelty, but they kept their distance, for Madam Clara's influence was vast, and her wealth knew no bounds. However, what lay behind her grand mansion's walls was a tale of wickedness that would leave the city in shock. Madam Clara's latest house help, a timid young girl, Nika, arrived in the household one quiet evening. No one knew where she came from, and Madam Clara didn't bother to ask. To her, Nika was just another servant, one she could control, intimidate, and mistreat without consequence. But what Madam Clara didn't know was at this time, she was not in control of the story. Nika was a quiet girl, never raising her voice or meeting Madam Clara's eyes. She moved with a graceful stillness, her presence barely noticeable, which seemed to infuriate Madam Clara even more. To her, silence was disobedience, and she loathed anything that threatened her dominance. From the moment Nika stepped foot in the house, Madam Clara made it her mission to break her spirit. Days turned into weeks, and Nika was subjected to every cruelty imaginable. Madam Clara would wake her in the middle of the night to redo chores that were already perfect, just to see her suffer. She denied Nika food as punishment, locked her out in the rain, and forced her to scrub floors until her hands bled. The more Nika endured without complaint, the more vicious Madam Clara became, driven by a relentless need to assert her power. One stormy evening, after a particularly harsh punishment, Madam Clara pushed Nika into the cold, dark basement, locking her in with a wicked grin. She threw in some mouldy bread and a bucket of water, barely enough to last the night, and slammed the door shut. "Maybe this will teach you to be more obedient," she spat, her voice echoing in the damp darkness. Nika's faint cries were swallowed by the roaring thunder outside, and Madam Clara retired to her luxurious bed, unbothered by the suffering she had inflicted. As the weeks went by, Nika's condition worsened. She grew thin, her once bright eyes dulled, and her movements slowed from exhaustion and malnutrition, yet she never once complained. Instead, she continued her tasks with quiet resilience, her eyes always downcast, her face a blank mask that hid her thoughts. Despite Nika's silent endurance, the abuse escalated. Madam Clara took perverse joy in Nika's suffering, seeing her pain as a testament to her own power. She began to question Nika's silence, feeling an odd discomfort she couldn't quite place. Nika never begged for mercy, never cried for help. She simply existed in a way that unnerved Madam Clara, though she would never admit it. One day, Madam Clara hosted a grand party, inviting the city's elite to showcase her wealth and status. Nika, despite her frail state, was ordered to serve the guests, her hands trembling as she carried trays of food and drink. Throughout the night, Madam Clara's cruel jabs and insults were relentless, and Nika endured them all without a word. The guests, witnessing Nika's plight, exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to challenge Madam Clara's authority. As the evening drew to a close, an unexpected visitor arrived. A tall, regal woman dressed in traditional attire, her presence commanding and mysterious. Madam Clara, initially annoyed by the uninvited guest, felt a chill run down her spine when the woman spoke. Her voice was calm, yet filled with a quiet power that silenced the room. "I have come for my daughter," the woman announced, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on Nika, who stood in the corner, her head bowed. Madam Clara's face twisted in confusion and anger. "Your daughter," she scoffed, glancing at Nika with disdain. "This is my servant, not your daughter." The room fell silent as the woman stepped forward, her gaze piercing into Madam Clara's eyes. "She's not just any servant," the woman said slowly, her voice resonating with an eerie calm. "Nika is my daughter, the lost princess of the River Kingdom." Madam Clara's face drained of color. The River Kingdom was a place of legend, a mystical realm hidden from human eyes, ruled by powerful beings with magic in their blood. It was said that the rulers of the River Kingdom could walk among humans, and those who crossed them would face unspeakable consequences. The woman revealed that Nika had been sent to the human world to learn humility and the harsh realities of life beyond the kingdom. She had chosen to live among humans as a servant to experience the hardships that her people faced. However, her mission was never to endure such cruelty, and her mother's heart could no longer bear the suffering her daughter had silently endured. Madam Clara's eyes widened in terror as the woman's words sank in. She had not only mistreated a house help, she had abused a princess, a being whose power and wrath could destroy everything Madam Clara held dear. The wealthy woman fell to her knees, pleading for forgiveness, her voice shaking with fear. But the regal woman only stared at her with cold, unforgiving eyes. "You treated my daughter as less than human, and for that, you will face the consequences of your actions," the woman declared. With a wave of her hand, the grand mansion began to crumble, the walls shaking and the ground splitting open. Madam Clara screamed, her voice lost in the chaos, as the guests fled in terror. As the mansion collapsed around her, Madam Clara realized too late that her wealth and status could not protect her from the consequences of her cruelty. Nika, now revealed as the princess she truly was, stood tall and unbothered amidst the destruction, her expression serene as she watched the only life Madam Clara knew fall apart. In the end, Madam Clara was left with nothing, no riches, no mansion, and no status. She wandered the streets, a shadow of her former self, begging for mercy she would never receive. Nika returned to her kingdom, her mission complete, having learned the depths of human cruelty and the strength that lay within her. The moral lesson of this story is never judge or mistreat someone based on their appearance or status, for you never know their true identity or the power they hold within. Treat everyone with kindness and respect, for in the end, it is our actions that define us.